Chui, which is, of course, Japanese for Achtung. I mean, maybe not the way I say it. Anyway, it's 80 years.
So how else could you say it then, do you think?
Well, I don't know. Chui.
Chui.
I don't want to.
You don't want to be
cancelled. I don't want us to get cancelled. Yeah, exactly.
By our Japanese listeners. All three of them.
People worried about our Japanese listeners because that's how it works. It's 80 years, of course, since the Battle of Midway, perhaps the single most important sea engagement of the Second World War. Perhaps. But I would argue that the entire Normandy-Neptune sea encounter is the most important. But there you go. More of Midway in a moment. But first, welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray and James Holland. Britain is bathed in sunshine, but I'm in France on manoeuvres. Yeah, baby.
Yeah, and I'm very, very delighted to hear that the Aztec toad has been back in form.
Oh, I tell you though, last night. Well, the thing is, there's a pond over the road, but in the next house there's a pond, and it's do. It's like
so it's not sounding quite so Aztec anymore.
It's where's it? Well, the submarine.
There's a lot of
subs.
There's a lot of subs
are very close, but it's basically a toad orgy going on in the house next door, like a great big pile on of toads. I need to go. I'm tonight. I'll go out with my camera and see if I can capture them at it. Film some toad porn.
Well, I've got to say, down here it was another disappointing weekend for me on the cricket front.
Yeah. What happened, Jim?
Well, I'm feeling great, Nick. I don't feel there's anything going wrong at all. I had a net with a skipper on Friday night. I was, timing it nicely.
Share with the group.
Bastard ran me out for one.
Now, what? So take us through the run out then. So did you?
So I was facing short ball.
Yeah.
Square cut it. Looked like it had gone past the fielder, but actually stopped it. Joe called the run from the other end. My call. It's in front of square.
Oh no.
And because he was on 47 not out and he's the captain, I had to do the decent thing. It was a long, it's down in Bedminster. It's like an hour and 20 minutes away. Beautiful ground and everything, but it's a long way to go. And then we lost by 2 runs.
2 runs?
2 runs.
That's not the way you want to go, is it? No. I mean, still, England were in fine form yesterday, so maybe your wicket was necessary for the national good.
Maybe in some weird way.
Great to love hath no man that lays down his wicket for Joe Root's runs.
Well, I would agree with that. And also... the build is afoot at the Chalk Valley History Festival, and so tents are going up, and
great.
It's just looking stunning. It's looking so beautiful, green and lush, and azure blue skies, and all the rest of it. So that's all very exciting.
And what? That's a fortnight away, isn't it?
No, a week.
Ah, God, you must have ground rush then of it suddenly looming up at you.
Yeah. It comes out. Well, I sort of turned out the other day. The tracking's down. I thought, God, this feels familiar. Is it only a year since the last one?
Yeah.
Comes around.
Well, the year pounds round, doesn't it? It's the truth.
Yeah.
Catches up with all of us.
We're having a lot of fun rearranging everyone's travel arrangements because of the rail strike.
Oh God! So you and Glastonbury basically on the horns of, is it ASLEF? I can't remember which unions.
RMT, isn't it?
And then,
presumably Tankfest having the same problems, but anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, but these things pale into significance compared to when pondering great anniversaries such as that of the 4th of June 1942, the Battle of Midway.
Yes, Battle of Midway. And also it's sort of a week after D-Day, isn't it? So and
well, it's 2 days before. 2 days before. And here we are a week after D-Day, now.
Yeah, but what we've always said is that the thing about the Normandy battle is it isn't just D-Day, that you've got to know what's going on in the weeks that follow. So, there's I mean, maybe what we need to do is try and blaze a trail for D+7 as a national anniversary.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been
quite a hard sell.
Yeah, I've been rereading a book about Midway the last week, and it's just such an incredible battle, and subsequent historians always trying to sort of if only this thing had happened, then it could have been so different, or if it turned on this particular sequence. But the point is there's no one single thing that turns the battle. It's lots and lots of happenstance. It's lots of different things going on, and actually quite a lot of it is doctrinal. There's different doctrinal way of doing things. I mean, for example, the Japanese carrier groups, their air groups, they like to stick to their carrier. So there's no kind of messing around. So two of the carriers which have been involved in the Battle of the Coral Sea. Well, it's really interesting because Yorktown and the Lexington, obviously Lexington gets sunk and the Yorktown gets very badly damaged at the Battle of Coral Sea at the beginning of May 1942. But Yorktown goes back to Pearl Harbor and they work round the clock to get it ready again, so it's back out again. Yeah. And whereas the Shikaku, which is badly damaged, is still badly damaged a month later.
Yeah.
And the Zuikaku, which is absolutely fine, but has lost half its air group, they don't send that out because it's lost half its air group.
Yeah.
Whereas if they'd taken half of the air group from Shikaku and put it on Zuikaku, then Zuikaku, which is one of the state-of-art carriers, could have been involved in Midway. Yeah, but that's not the Japanese way.
The Americans commit pell-mell to the battle, don't they? So they just, whatever they've got, they stick up in the sky and they send it to the Japanese, don't they? And the Japanese have to do it in ordered groups because that's doctrine, concentration of force, which is after all entirely sensible and time-honoured and the logical conclusion of how you should go about these things. Funnily enough, I've been reading, and this is pertinent to this. I've been reading David French's new book about appeasement, deterrence, and strategy in the interwar years.
Right.
The British assessment of the Japanese character that feeds very directly into why there won't be a war in the Far East is that, Japanese people are indecisive. They don't like taking risks. They might be well organised and hard-working, but they're not going to ever attempt anything on a major scale. And this is, to then see, obviously, and this is sort of early 20s where they're coming up with these assessments of everybody. And also that only, and there's a point in 1921 where the committee responsible decided that France and Japan are probably the next two countries we might run into militarily. Or great powers, at least. Yeah. All right then. Anyway, but
the traditional enemy. The Japanese will work shy and we'll go back to war and it'll be like the 100 Years' War again.
Well, exactly, but it's all like that. All the assessments are like that. The German is poor at improvisation, and is a bad winner. A good loser, but a bad winner. It's Trenchard's assessment of the Germans. It's like,
wow.
It's all completely bonkers. I mean, it's well worth a look, this stuff, but it's completely balmy.
That sounds insane.
Yeah, but we could talk about it a bit more. But it just feeds into the fact that there's the Japanese being completely Clausewitzian about their approach to air power at sea, isn't it? Is you concentration of force, you deliver a maximum punch. You don't improvise the trained groups. You don't re-switch people to different ships because they're probably thinking the time and effort taken to retrain half an air group to a different carrier's way of doing things. Yeah, it isn't. It's not worth trying. It'll scramble everyone's brains too much and interfere really with like how you run things in a routine way. That must be what they're thinking.
Yes, I guess so. It's just interesting because the US Navy way is to be much more interchangeable.
Yeah.
1 minute you're in a you're in Scouting 6, and the next minute you're kind of on Yorktown. The next minute you're on the Hornet, and that's absolutely fine. And no one bats an eye. They all look pretty much the same. They're all organised on the same structure.
Yeah.
Same kind of systems and everything. So it's a bit like transferring from a fighter command airfield in Northumberland to Kent.
Yeah.
It looks slightly different, and there's a few things which are different, but the principles are all the same. The Japanese
don't seem to be
doing that.
But that's like an American mass production attitude, isn't it? I mean, it's one size fits all. Everything's modular. You plug into this, which is completely at odds with, obviously, or in stark contrast, the Japanese way of doing things. And it's interesting because the Japanese way of doing things up to that point has been pretty successful.
And you're absolutely right about concentration of force. And yet, paradoxically, that's exactly what they don't achieve because, of course, Yamamoto splits his force. The whole point is this elaborate plan. The elaborate plan on paper sounds great. What we'll do is we'll just put the carrier force there and we'll goad them into this trap. The American carrier force will come forward. They'll launch their planes, and then we'll launch theirs on theirs, and they'll be caught short, and that's all going to be fine. And then we'll follow up with our heavy surface ships, and they'll do the coup de grace. And that's great until you realise that, you know, Japanese ships don't have radar, and have very limited means of communicating with one another. And that Yamamoto's surface force, which has got something like 5 destroyers, you know, 4 heavy cruisers, 2 light carriers, etc., 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 is 200 miles away from the, you know, Kido Butai, the main carrier force. And so they're not mutually supporting in any shape or form whatsoever. And they're completely out of comms, pretty much. They can do sort of radio signals, but there's no radar or anything like that. You know, so it's and the radio comms in themselves are dodgy and problematic because people aren't getting the right messages at the right time. So it's Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, who is the commander of the Kido Butai, the carrier force. And for example, the American carrier fleet is spotted, I think, at something like 7:40 in the morning of the 4th of June. But Nagumo's not told until 8 o'clock. And then he's got this terrible dilemma. What does he do? Does he say, because so what he's done is earlier that morning, he sent out, 5 o'clock or 4:30 or something. He sent off half of his air forces to go and attack Midway Island, Midway Atoll. And so they've gone off there, and they're due back any minute at kind of 8-ish, any moment now. But he's kept half his force back. So he knows that the US carrier force has been spotted. So does he send them off now, but then risk the landing of half of his force coming back from Midway because they won't be able to land while the others are taking off? Or does he think it's okay now because we know where they are? We'll just do it later. What do you do? Do you strike now immediately while you got the chance, or do you hope you've still got the chance in an hour's time once the others are back?
You strike now immediately. You strike now, always strike now immediately, surely.
And what Al do you think Nagumo decides to do?
Wait.
He does.
Yeah.
He does. And so what's happened is he is initially sending his reserve force to Midway. So he's thinking, okay, I've got my reserve force. Once the others come back, we'll send them back to Midway. So they're armed with general purpose bombs, all his torpedo bombers. So they can just do normal bombing. Then what happens is he hears about the carrier force, so he thinks, oh, okay, maybe I need to do the carrier force first. Then so that's one dilemma. So then he orders all the torpedo bombers to be rearmed with torpedoes. But that's easier said than done because you've got to take off all the. Not only have you got to take off the bombs, you've also got they have different catches on the on the underside of the plane. So they have to be, not only does the bomb have to be taken off, so does the catch belt. Then a different clasp has to be put on for the torpedoes, and that's understandable. You can imagine a torpedo's a great big long thing. Bombs are sort of squat and round, and sort of more lozenge.
And they haven't solved that problem.
They haven't solved that problem. So they haven't got enough. So you know these bombers are torpedo bombers or they're traditional bombers, and they're multi-role. So that is still in process. That is being undertaken when the Midway guys are coming back from their first mission. And so that is why they're all on their ships when the American attacks. So first of all, there's like 2 hours of American attacks, and the B-17s come over from Midway. They're completely ineffective, bombing from kind of 14,000 feet. Of course, they don't hit a single thing. Nothing's happened. And so and all that's happening is the Zeros are being taken off from the the defensive Zeros. The fighter planes are taking off and absolutely slaughtering these torpedo bombers, these American devastators, which are devastatingly ineffective, and the B-17s. And devastators are still coming in at 10 o'clock. When the dive bombers first arrive on the scene, about 10 past 10 in the morning, 9 minutes past 10.
Yeah.
And the point about the dive bombers is that all the attention is on the devastators. And the way the devastators come into attack with their torpedoes is they come in very low.
Low and slow.
And slow. And they're very easy to hit. They're very easy to hit by Zeros, and they're also very easy to hit by anti-aircraft fire. But what that means is your anti-aircraft fire is obviously facing pretty much horizontally rather than vertically.
Yeah.
And the point about the dive bombers is they've been circling around for ages. The lead group is from the Enterprise, USS Enterprise, which is led by this guy called Wade McCluskey, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey. And for an aviator, he's pretty old. You know, he's like 40-something. He's kind of squat-faced. He's kind of been there, done it. He's what's called a black shoe, so he's kind of old school. He's not part of the kind of modern team. And he's done every type of aviation you could possibly imagine. Been a fighter pilot, bomber pilot, done everything. Now he's leading the dive bombers in their Douglas Dauntlesses. Yeah. And they can't see anything, and they've already used half their fuel. And they're thinking, what do we do? Do we turn around? And McCluskey goes, no, we're gonna keep on looking. And then eventually, in the nick of time, they see the wake of this Japanese cruiser. Yeah. Destroyer, rather. A destroyer. And so they head after it, the Arashi. And they head after the Arashi, and it leads them straight to the carrier force. And so that's why they're there at kind of 10:10 in the morning. And of course, all the Japanese are looking straight ahead. And the other thing about concentration of force is that the way the Japanese Zeros operate, when they've got the enemy, they're kind of like, they sort of attack it like white blood cells on a tuxin. You know, they just go home in on it, cluster it, and just overwhelm it. But that also means that they're low level, and their focus is entirely on dealing with these devastators coming in, these American torpedo bombers. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that the Japanese decide to attack Midway, which after all they can't sink, rather than that's the sort of centerpiece of their attempt to bring the US Navy to battle, rather than think, well, isn't sinking carriers should be our priority rather than taking out an airbase. That even that in its conception is you can bomb Midway all you like, but you can't send it to the bottom of the Pacific, can you? In the way
they're planning to invade it. I think that's the idea.
I know, but you know what I mean. You can't do why aren't they leaving that till last? That seems like a very strange way round of doing things, because after all, and we've talked about this before. Sinking ships are expensive. Ships are they take time to replace them. We've already touched on that. It seems cart before the horse a little. That if your problem is the US Navy, what you need to be doing is sending the US Navy to the bottom so that it can't interfere with you taking out Midway. Do you see what I mean?
Completely, yeah. I mean, I think the whole plan for the Japanese plan for Midway is way too complicated. It's got far too many moving parts in it without the sufficient comms to be enable it to work.
Yeah, but that's a question. Isn't it interesting the Japanese don't have radar?
It's completely.
It's 1942. Radar has surely been announced to the world by now. Its existence. Mm-hmm. The massive success of RDF in 1940, the Battle of Britain. People would have, anyone with their ear to the ground militarily would have gone, oh well, obviously there's a watching device of some kind. Had the Germans not told them about their own, their own radar developments, it seems sort of unfathomable, doesn't it? And it might.
Well, they certainly have radar by 1944, but later on in the war, but they don't have it then, and it's you've got these aircraft carriers which are just unbelievably sophisticated pieces of kit. Yeah. With hydraulic lifts kind of taking people up and down from the deck down below and all this kind of stuff. I mean, unbelievable. But no radar. Yeah. And nor to, there's only a handful of radios in the aircraft as well. So Japanese Zeros, for example, have to communicate with each other with hand signals. Yeah. I mean, that's not great, is it?
Well, no, it's not. And I suppose there's one guy who's leading with a radio, and then if he's shot down, where do the others go?
Yeah, then it's you just have to.
Yeah.
It's not good at all. And by the time the dive bombers are up in the sky, everyone's focus is on what's happening at kind of almost sea level. Yeah. By the time you've got that, you've got on both the Kaga and the Akagi, you've got 38 fully loaded and fueled aircraft each. Yeah. So each, so on both carriers, that amounts to something like 8,800 pounds of explosives. So what's that? 4.5 tons of explosives just in the torpedoes, and 1.5 tons of bombs. Yeah. all loaded up, and fuel. So that's the perfect storm, isn't it?
But yes, it is. But it's also, I mean, it's this sort of eternal problem with ships, isn't it? Is that if you get them at the right moment, they will go up, and there's nothing anyone can do about it.
I mean, they've been, the Japanese carriers are described as having a glass chin, so they're very good at giving a punch, but not at taking one back. And so it happens. So that so you have this amazing sort of thing that you've got these dive bombers circling at 22 minutes past 10. And then at 23 minutes past 10 is when the first one is, which is led by McCluskey, is diving down on the cargo. And they have some radio comms problems because McCluskey's leading one lot and Dick Best is leading bombing 6 or whatever it is, his squadron. And he doesn't hear that he's supposed to be going for the Akagi. So they're all heading for the same thing, all sort of screaming down. But I mean, what's amazing about it is, you kind of think Stuka dive bombers, it's kind of 8,000 feet, getting down to, 1,500 or whatever. These guys start from kind of 14,000 feet. And they're supposed to drop their bombs at 2,500 feet. Well, I mean, you and I, we've been up in the air at 2,500 feet. That's still quite a long way up.
Yeah.
It still looks like it's incredibly difficult to hit.
If you're pointing at the, if you've done your sums right, I suppose. Anyway, we need to take a very, very brief break.
And then we can go back to the 5 minutes that changed the world.
5 minutes that changed the world. We'll see you shortly. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. We are talking about the 5 minutes that changed the world. The Battle of Midway. But before we do that, before we get into that, and our grittiest American accents possible, a reminder that our second summer festival is coming up soon. Just as James spoke of Chalk Valley Festival approaching, a month later, we have Ways Fest, and it takes place from Friday, July the 22nd to Sunday, July the 24th. So it's sort of 2.5 days of prime slice war waffle. I mean, of the highest calibre. We've got 3 tents with all the best Second World War historians coming to talk about their specialisms. We've got Max Hastings on Churchill, Randomness to talk about the war in China, Katrin Himmler to talk about legacy, basically, living with the legacy of the Second World War. We've also got 50 plus military vehicles, and there'll be food stalls. The curry stall is back. Beers are plenty. Flying dustbin, craft pills. What else is there, Jim? There's Jumping Jim.
Jumping Jim, Gavin.
So beers themed to your interests and specialisations, ladies and gentlemen. And this year we've got a small marketplace for you to buy your Second World War stuff, if that's your bag. For details on speakers, hardware, how to get tickets, where it is, where to go, it's wehavewaysfest.co.uk. That's wehavewaysfest.co.uk. And we very much look forward to seeing you there.
It's going to be properly good.
It is going to be properly good. I've been assembling the family stories stuff. And it's... Yeah. And it's there's something in my eye. That's all I'm going to say.
Really.
Yeah.
And the great thing is we've got some Americans coming over, so we can do real American accents.
The real American accents. In 1942 and June 4th.
So Tuesday.
Was it a Tuesday?
Well, I don't know. No, it's a Sunday.
You see,
I think. It's Sunday. Of course, it's Sunday the 4th of June. Of course, it is because it's Tuesday the 6th of June.
Yes, exactly. Because I always think, do people know what day of the week these things happened on? Because I think
but the Americans don't say on Tuesday. They go, the Battle of Midway took place Sunday.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Tuesday, 6 June, D-Day. Anyway,
exactly all that.
The thing is, so there is this. I mean, earlier on you talked about 20 minutes where the Japanese are deciding what to do. Yep. But this battle is famously decided by 5 minutes, isn't it? So there's and
it is, and it's just so thrilling because it up until that point, the kind of where are we? We're now at 10:22 a.m. as Wade McCluskey is preparing to launch his first dive, and there's something like 39 Dauntless dive bombers circling above the carrier fleet at this point from various squadrons. And up until that point, it's been, the Japanese attack on Midway itself hasn't been completely successful, but they've shot down lots of American planes, shore-based naval fighter planes, and that hasn't worked very well. And any American planes that's got anywhere near the carriers have just been absolutely slaughtered. I mean, it is a total slaughter for the Devastators. The B-17s have got nowhere. The Mitchells have got nowhere. There haven't been any recorded hits at all on the Japanese. It's all looking pretty bad. So despite Japanese hubris, despite their overcomplicated plan, it's looking like, their
technological weakness that you don't need radar if you've got an effective anti-aircraft screen. You're all right.
Yep. And carriers are quite, the Japanese carriers are quite well armed, particularly in anti-aircraft guns. So, it's all looking quite good for the Japanese, despite, it not going 100% according to plan. Yeah. And then these dive bombers scream down, and they're just completely caught about it. And I've heard it said that Dusty Cleiss, who's one of the dive bombers, celebrated dive bombers in this attack, sort of claims that a dive bomber is invulnerable to anti-aircraft fire. Well, it's just absolutely not true at all.
Well, it's silly. Yeah.
And it's just nonsense. But the reason they're invulnerable at that point is because all the anti-aircraft guns are facing horizontally to try and shoot down the Devastators, which are being shot down in droves. And their attention's just not on it. Yeah. And they're caught short. And because all the Zeros are down at surface level, swarming like white blood cells around a toxin, and they're not on it either. They can't just rapidly adjust. It's too late. It takes, a matter of a minute or so to dive down on a plane. Yeah. So the first attack on the Kaga is at 10:23, and the Kaga gets attacked by 27 different pilots and 4 hits, which Dusty Cleiss's is one. And Dusty Cleiss, for example, like all of them, he's got a 500-pound bomb and he's got a 200-pound bombs. And what he's aiming for is the massive, great red circle on the foredeck of the carriers, which just says bullseye.
Yeah.
And his bomb goes straight through the deck, and it's got a delayed fuse on it, and then detonates, a moment later. And by that moment later, it's kind of already halfway down through the ship. And precisely the point where it needs to be most effective, which is where there's already 38 loaded, torpedo bombers and dive bombers loaded up with bombs and torpedoes and explosives and fuel. Of course, it's just an absolute inferno. And the Kaga gets hit 4 times, whereas Dick Best, right at the last minute, averts and switches to attack the Akagi, followed by 2 of his squadron. He's the only one who gets a hit, but it's a fatal hit. It's absolutely on the bull. And again, hits the red circle. And then 9 pilots hit the Soryu, which gets 3 hits. But overall, that's a 21% hit rate.
Well, I was just going to say...
Which is pretty good.
Well, no, I was going to say, surely we'd argue that's pretty bad. I mean, it's,
Well, but if you think how odd it is...
Well, yes, but if you've got the pilots simultaneously thinking, the idea that you could say, the dive bomb is invulnerable and it's a perfect weapon. Well, yeah, if you hit anything, if not, then not. I mean, I think
it's not a perfect weapon at all.
Well, no, because you look at, currently in Ukraine, there's quite a lot of discussion of whether Russian smart munitions actually hit any of the things they're meant to. They've got an 80% miss rate or something. But here we are looking at a 20% success rate, and it's actually it's of strategic effect, let alone tactical effect in its moment. You know what I mean? I think
I guess.
These numbers are interesting. And is there but it raises the question: is there a better way of doing this than dive bombing? Probably not. You haven't got ship-to-ship missiles, have you? The gunnery isn't an option at these kind of distances, because that's the whole point of air power, is that you're removing gunnery from the equation. I mean, how often does a broadside hit its target? Which is after all its competitor in this battlefield.
But there's no question that kind of, one hit by Dick Best on the Akagi is probably not going to do the business, were it not for the fact that all their planes are on the second deck.
Yeah.
Armed to the teeth.
Yeah.
So it's the ripple effect. And, you look at photographs of the Kaga, having been hit. I mean, it's just an absolute inferno. I mean, this thing is just completely... I mean, all three of them are just gone. So 3 of the 4 carriers are just knocked out. And that is... And it's not just the carrier. When you're that far out at sea, that means all your planes have gone as well.
Yeah.
You've got no means of...
Defending the carrier group after that, have you?
No, you're absolutely stuffed.
You, in theory, get picked off. I mean, and the other things, of course, Japan's producing these ships at a much slower speed than the US. I mean, this is why I'm saying, it's interesting that they attack an island rather than the US Navy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a poor plan. I mean,
they do attack. They do. I mean, they do get to the Navy, to the US Navy, don't they? But the die is cast at this point of the battle. Really, whatever they do afterwards is Pyrrhic, isn't it?
Yes, because they can't compete with. I mean, the whole they always knew that industrially, the United States was its superior.
Yeah.
So the whole point was to try and neutralise it as much as you possibly could and give the Japanese some breathing space. Yeah. But that only works if you do neutralise it. If you get neutralised yourself, then just
but what's so peculiar,
the whole plan goes to pot.
But what's so peculiar is the Japanese establishment is full of people who are really familiar with America and have lived there and travelled there.
Yamamoto himself.
Exactly, and are plugged into the American way, understand America to considerable extent. And that they should convince themselves, because after all, there's, Pearl Harbor arguably is where Japan thinks, Christ, what are we going to, we got to basically accelerate this war to bring it to a conclusion because we're losing, and it's a last roll of the dice, actually, Pearl Harbor, and they feel compelled to that action, and the fact that it then doesn't work, the fact that it delivers the opposite reaction from the Americans that they're hoping for, is fascinating. Given that, like you say, that Yamamoto knows America and he's familiar with the place.
Well, it's Yamamoto's argument was that if we go to war with America, we're going to lose, almost certainly. But almost certainly is not completely certainly, and the only vague chance we've got is by setting back the US Navy for 6 months to a year, and giving us a chance to kind of secure all our new possessions. And then coming to a settled peace with the United States. That's the big plan, but there's an awful lot of kind of moving parts in that. There's an awful lot of ifs and buts. And he doesn't think it's got much chance of work, but he thinks it's the only conceivable chance of getting out of this shtick.
Yeah, because things have gone so terribly in China.
Absolutely, and they're increasingly urbanised, and they haven't got enough food, they haven't got enough anything, and they just can't do what they want to do. But what Yamamoto then follows up with is this plan for Midway, which is just too complicated, and it's and it is a dispersal of concentration of force and all that kind of thing. But again, the battle turns on all sorts of different things. The fact that the US code breakers managed to break the Japanese JN-25 naval code, the fact that Nagumo makes the wrong decision, but he might not have done.
He might not have done. And after all, the thing we've been talking about,
the dive bombers might have missed.
Well, but
they might have got 1, not 3.
Well, exactly. The dive bombers definitely might have missed. But it's also this thing. Or they'd have got 20 on and inflicted an even greater defeat. Or they need is. The 4 hits out of however many, let's say they get 8, they could go the other way, all go the other way. I mean, I think what's interesting though is these decisions. Last week we talked about, or we were kicking around the idea of, that how you arrive at a decision like that. He's arrived at that decision. It's the right decision as far as he's concerned. He's not thinking, well, this will cock it all. Yeah. He's not thinking this will all cock it up wildly and we're going to. This will cause a series of chain of events that will result in the defeat of the Imperial Navy here at Midway. He's thinking, right, that's the right thing to do. That's what we've got to do, And I think there is this. Is it a historical fallacy that we've got to be very careful with? That just because that's the way it turned out was meant that every decision every decision leads you there, or is it? Because these are clever people. I mean,
I suppose so. I suppose it's just a sort of assumption that whatever the Americans send. If you delay hitting the American carriers, they can always come to you. So there's two assumptions that he's making. One, that the American carriers don't know about them.
Yeah.
Secondly, that even if they do, they won't be able to penetrate their screen.
Yeah.
That whole kind of underestimating your enemy seems to be a kind of consistent failing of Axis powers in the Second World War.
Oh, well, and Allied powers. Everyone does it. Everyone does it all the time, don't they? It's the sort of people coming up with plans. It tends to involve the enemy doing what they want them to do. It tends to involve
yes, I suppose so. CF on them.
Well, or I don't know. I mean, or even Alamein. The Germans don't quite do what, and the Italians don't quite do what's asked of them by that master plan. And luckily, they're able to. Luckily, there's enough flex in things to be able to deal with that. But is this? That's a consistent part of military planning. The enemy will fold here and we'll get that, and then we'll be able to do this and do that, and that seems to be consistent. Everyone does it, don't they? I think it's easy to say that the Axis powers do that, but I think the Allied powers do an awful lot. I mean,
I suppose so.
Russians for a terribly long time think the Germans aren't going to bother them at all.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Fair point. But it is it's an amazing battle, and I think life out on the mid-ocean, being a naval aviator, whether you're Japanese or whether you're American, must be incredibly stressful. I mean, what's also really interesting is I think looking at some of the characters involved, they all there doesn't seem to be that kind of sort of cheery camaraderie that you get in 92 Squadron in Fighter Command, for example. They all seem to be really competitive and really hate each other's guts, half of them, and I think it's because they're all on top of each other the whole time.
Yeah.
They're in these little crew rooms, these ready rooms, which are incredibly cramped. There's no escape, is there? There's no going to the pub. You're not allowed to drink on a ship. You're allowed to eat lots of ice cream, but that pales after a while, I would imagine. And I think it's the stress and strain of it. I think it just must be so stressful, and your chances of your get out is kind of very, very small, isn't it? If anything goes wrong.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you ditch in the Pacific? I mean,
great.
Yeah, it's not like you parachute out over Hornchurch, is it?
No, it absolutely isn't. That's sort of really my point.
Yeah, well, and also just the aviation's is on a more difficult level, isn't it? Is that taking and landing off a carrier is extremely high stress in a way again that bimbling around a grass field. Although you were still talking about high performance aircraft, but it's
because if you're doing bumps at Hornchurch, for example, you'll get ribbed by your fellows, but that's the extent of it. Whereas if you bump on a carrier, you miss your arrestor wire, and it's not great, is it?
No, and also it's all new, isn't it? That's the other thing, is that this is all these techniques are brand new, are being, discovered and invented. I mean, it's fascinating that dive bombing is the effective way of doing it, of making this work, where dive bombing is pretty much obsolete by 1942 on land, isn't it? In land warfare. That your Stuka or whatever is no use to anybody.
Yeah.
Come the summer of 1940. Although it's still doing quite a lot on the Eastern Front, isn't it? Where the shape of the air war is different. I mean, what I've done there is I've proved to myself that making these generalisations is completely pointless.
Anyway, the bottom line is, hats off to all those guys who are involved on Midway, because, must have taken guts of steel.
I wonder what the Americans afterwards, what lessons they draw from it. Do they think, right, okay, dive bombing's the answer, or do they think more patrolling aircraft, more radar? What are the conclusions the Americans draw? And what are the conclusions the Japanese draw from this encounter?
Yeah, it's all of that. So I mean, the Dauntless is continued with until I think 1944. Although it's considered obsolescent even at the start of the war, but it's not until 1944 that the Helldivers come in, which are just. Is it Helldivers, skydivers? I can't remember. Anyway, it's the sort of Helldiver, maybe. Anyway, it's the next generation of dive bomber that comes in, and it's just that little bit better and more sophisticated and all the rest of it. I mean, the conclusions from the Japanese is they need better comms, they need a sort of better coordination, but it's already too late. That's the problem.
It's too late. Yeah.
Whereas the Americans can just hone it further. I mean, what follows is obviously the Guadalcanal. Which runs from sort of August of 42 to February 1943. And that involves some fearsome naval engagements. I mean, a series of battles of which, the Americans don't come out on top every single time by any stretch of the imagination. And ferocious aerial battles as well. But it's different. There's not a sort of another major sort of carrier battle for quite a long time. Not till sort of Leyte Gulf, I think, really.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, you can't do that sort of thing every other week, can you? That's the other.
No, you absolutely can't. You absolutely can't. But it is an amazing battle. I mean, in terms of kind of human drama, differing characters, twists and turns, peaks and troughs. It's an absolute belter, and it's very self-contained as well. So from a point of view of sort of writing a book about it or something, or telling a movie about it, it's kind of easy to do.
Well, it's a game of 2020 rather than a test match, isn't it? As naval encounters
exactly. Or even a T10, yeah.
100, yeah.
Yeah, 100, exactly. It was the 100 of naval battles.
I think that's quite a tough sell in America. I mean, I don't know about you, Jim.
For all US listeners, apologies.
Yeah.
It's like the third inning.
Using a cricketing analogy for an American battle.
No, but third inning is baseball.
It's fantastically futile, though. I'm just enjoying it.
Yeah.
No, stay with me. It's like Joe Root is...
Anyway.
That's funny. Yes, any other business?
I don't think so, really.
There's a very interesting article by Adam Tooze about Auftragstaktik that he's just put up.
Really?
On his Substack. Yes.
Oh,
about great. Talking about Ukraine, about how lots of people are going, oh look, the Ukrainians have learned mission command, and there's a cultural difference. There's a cultural difference because the Russians just try things again and again and again, regardless of whether they work or not, And I think he's cautioning against this idea that there's a cultural superiority thing going on. I managed to read sort of half of it yesterday. I didn't because I've been busy building flat pack furniture since the renovations at the house are finished. Yeah, it was fun.
Do you remember to bring your Allen key?
You bet. And yes, there's more to do as well. So, but I think it's very interesting because he was talking about the Americans after the war go for the sort of managerial style, and it's only later that the kind of the Wehrmacht glamour sort of infiltrates military teaching in America, and that's a funny thing. Funny enough, the thing Waitman is friend of the show, Waitman Bourne, former US cavalryman, has talked about how people at West Point would refer to tanks as panzers, their own tanks as panzers, and this sort of kind of trickle through of the glamorization of the Wehrmacht, and
I'd have thought that's a very dangerous policy.
Well, I would have thought it's extremely dangerous. I mean, I've been thinking again. I've been thinking about because I've written this chapter about Percy Hobart. I've been thinking more and more about that everyone draws strange lessons from the summer of 1940 in terms of how you do armoured warfare from a thing that works by chance as much as, it's like, what lessons do you draw from Midway? You could draw the lesson that what you need lots of dive bombers just tooling around over a likely battlefield in the hope they see a wake of a cruiser. You could draw that conclusion quite easily, and where's the method in that? How do you write a pamphlet that turns that into doctrine? I don't know. Do you see what I mean?
Or you could just get a massive submarine force.
Well, yeah, exactly. But it's this thing that very often and this also ties into that point that Matthew Ford makes in his book, that a lot of combat is completely random. Combat is completely it's a completely random sequence of events. The people who survive it survive purely by chance, and then are asked how to go about fighting. And it might be that they don't know.
Well, this is why Dusty Clyce is saying that the dive Dauntless is invulnerable to anti-aircraft fire, because he survived.
Because he survived, exactly. And
you're asking the wrong people. You're asking the wrong questions.
Well, exactly. You're asking the wrong. You might probably ask. I mean, you can't ask the other people. You can't ask the dead, obviously. But there's this really, really interesting thing at the core of how you draw lessons from anything like this, because after all, what works in 1940 only works in 1940 because of what the French offer against it, rather than necessarily because Guderian is some kind of genius. It's just his moments come along.
Yeah.
And to then expect that ever to work again and to draw it. I've been thinking about this.
That's a really interesting. That is a really interesting point.
How you grope towards actually figuring anything out from anything that's happened ever, given the contingencies, weather.
Yeah. Well, what do you? But okay. In terms of naval engagements, what would you think is the greatest challenge of all when operating in the Pacific?
Fuel.
Yeah, and well, I would say finding the target.
Yeah. Well, yes.
So I'd have thought the lessons from Midway is.
So finding the target within your logistical capacity. So
correct, yeah. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's all very well knowing where the Americans are, but if you can't actually strike them with any meaningful degree, you're probably better off not trying. Although this is the sort of, in the end, the Japanese are better off. We always end up saying this sort of thing. Don't start the war. If Germany wants to not lose the war, it needs to not start it. And if the Japanese want to not lose the war, they're better off not starting it. And, this sort of, and it always feels to me like the balls going back up with fear. That always feels to me like that sort of feeling. You know what I mean?
I do. That's really funny.
How you draw these conclusions, and then how people have ended up 80 years later, like still idolizing Guderian. When you look at how he
cocked it up on the Eastern Front.
Well, you took the word straight out of my mouth. Like what a complete mess he made of it, and how he talks about logistics of the ball and chain of armoured warfare. No, mate, no, they're absolutely not. They're the bread and butter.
They're the lifeblood.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just so interesting that this way of processing events that, after all, are essentially random. And I suppose what you do is you try and develop a doctrine that will survive the randomness of the encounter.
But that gets you back. That gets you back yet again to the operational level. It just does every single time. It's how do you do it, and how do you find your ship? How do you, within your logistic range, how do you supply it? How do you keep it all going in the Pacific? The bottom line is the Americans trump the Japanese, 100-fold within very short order. But what gives them the impetus and gives them that edge is the Battle of Midway. That is the enabler. That is what stops the Japanese surge.
And what you try and do is load the deck in your favour.
Yeah.
Anyway, there, good. Well, I'm glad we
managed. So we've solved Midway.
No, but I'm glad we managed to, because I've been thinking about this an awful lot. I
don't think we finished that conversation, to be honest. But maybe it's to be continued.
But it really, I keep thinking about the point that Matthew Ford makes about, because he's talking about the development of the rifle, which is, after all, because his whole thesis is, you look at the development of the rifle, which is the simplest weapon system that people are given.
I've got to get his book. What's it called again?
And it's called Weapon of Choice. and you've got these currents and ebbs and flows, and when engineers go to soldiers and soldiers say, I need this because this is my experience of battle, the point is that their experience of battle is the product of random circumstance. The engineer's approach is numbers and figures and what they can do to their budget, and then the collision between the two. And he's applying that to the rifle, but apply that to an aircraft carrier. The sheer complexity of the system of or a carrier group, the sheer complexity of that system. You can see why mistakes could easily get fed in, why you could still be flying an obsolescent bomber because there's nothing else available. You know, I mean, the Swordfish is the British equivalent, isn't it? That sinks a load of shipping, but basically there's nothing else to sink shipping with. I mean, I think people have had the Swordfish.
And also, there's not a lot fighting against it, but.
Well, exactly. When people go, the Swordfish, perfectly good weapon. Well, yeah, because of what it's up against, and also there's no other options. So what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You know. And I think that idea at the heart of all of this, there's this chaotic moment when people people bump into each other, because after all, Midway is the two navies bumping into each other. There's it's literally like they've just bumped into each other in the street. Oh, right, what do we do now? You know, and that there's a chaotic thing, and then someone tries to build a system out of it and learn from it, and then create doctrine that can be trained into people and applicable, and that has enough flexibility in it to deal with the inevitable chaos that comes out. It's so fascinating, and it's the sort of, but also surely a path strewn with red herrings and examples that from which you actually can't learn anything. But you might invest a lot of time trying to figure out what they tell you. You know, it's also. I mean, this is the thing I've been thinking about an awful lot. Anyway, there we go.
There you have it. Well, I think this will be a theme we return to, I suspect.
I think it definitely has to be. Anyway, I think that's probably sufficient.
Enough, isn't it?
That's properly sufficient Kriegspiel from us.
Yeah, I've got to spend the rest of the day talking about Guderian crossing the River Meuse in May 1940.
Yeah, well, wasn't anything you did right.
That's my Monday.
But my opinion is it wasn't anything you did right. It was everyone else getting it wrong. There you go.
Yeah, I'm not entirely I'm not going to disagree with that assessment.
Just one final nudge. Don't forget, it's We Have Ways Fest, Friday, July 22nd to Sunday, July 24th. And you can see us in the flesh talking like this to one another.
You lucky people.
You can be there. You can smell the brain petrol being burned. wehavewaysfest.co.uk. That's wehavewaysfest.co.uk. We look forward to seeing
hand signals like the Japanese across the field.
Exactly. The festival does have radar, though. Just want to point out.
Very
because
good.
It's 2022. We'll see you all soon. Thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.
Cheerio.